When the 2023 season eventually comes to an end for the Washington Huskies, they are going to be losing their Heisman Trophy finalist at quarterback in Michael Penix Jr., but they are going to be replacing him now with one of the very best and most experienced quarterbacks in this transfer portal cycle. Can Will Rogers continue to deliver that MONTLAKE magic as we look forward to the inaugural season in the Big Ten Conference in 2024 for these Huskies?
From LA to Piscataway, all Big Ten all year long. This is Big Ten 10.
Fit. It's a word, a buzzword really, that people talk about when it pertains to transfer portal players going from one school to another, specifically quarterbacks going from one offense and one scheme to the other. And when you talk about the fit, that is Will Rogers going from Mississippi State over to the West Coast to Washington, you got to look back, maybe not at 2023, but you got to look back at 2021 and 2022 when Will Rogers was in a system that really fit his skill set a lot better, and really a system that played in to his great passing ability and his great skill set. In 2021 and 2022, he was lighting the world on fire. He was putting up some of the best numbers, not only in the SEC, but in all of college football. What kind of system was he in? He was in Mike Leach's air raid system where they threw the ball around a lot. And now you're going to a place in Seattle, Washington, that, as I just mentioned, just produced a Heisman Trophy finalist at quarterback that had the best wide receiver room in all of college football. I'd say the fit is definitely there for Will Rogers going over to Washington. You know, in the transfer portal, you look at Dylan Gabriel at Oregon. You kind of look at some of these other ones where you have a one-year situation. I think this is as good of a one-year transfer situation at the quarterback position as you're going to see headed into 2024. I really like what the Washington Huskies have done here. When we look back at Will Rogers, man, you know, this past year, I want to start there before I really go back and marvel at what 2021 to 2022 were for Will Rogers. Of course, the unfortunate and tragic passing of Mike Leach at the end of last season. Zach Arnett comes in to be the head coach of Mississippi State, brings in an offensive coordinator from App State, and they're not throwing it around as much. This is not an offense that Will Rogers was close to being in, even the last few years. So the fit wasn't there. He was banged up, got injured, I believe, in the Western Michigan game. So he wasn't maybe 100% this whole season. So I think that kind of led to the struggles in 2023. But 2021 and 2022, statistically, he was one of the very best quarterbacks in all of college football, going up against some great competition, of course, in the SEC. In 2021, he threw for nearly 5,000 yards, 4,739 yards, 36 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, and even in an offense that threw it as much as they did down in Starkville, he was very efficient throwing the ball, 74% completion rate. In 2022, just under 4,000 yards, 3,974, 35 touchdowns and 8 interceptions. Even though you're taking a dip, still a 68% completion rate. That's still pretty darn efficient. I know those numbers in 2022, it seems like he's taking a pretty sizable dip. But when you throw for nearly 4,000 yards, 35 scores, and complete 68% of your passes, you're still doing pretty darn good. And Will Rogers was still pretty darn good in 2022. I believe that the offense that he was in earlier in the Mike Leach era at Mississippi State, I think it translates pretty well to what Kalen DeBoer is going to want to do, and what Ryan Grubb, the offensive coordinator, is going to want to do. Look what they did with Michael Penix Jr. He was a good quarterback at Indiana. Now, he did play 2 years, but he developed into one of the nation's top quarterbacks. I think Will Rogers right now is sitting a little bit higher coming into Seattle than Michael Penix was when he came into Seattle. Now, I will admit they're a little bit of a different quarterback. You're not dealing with a tomato situation, so Washington is going to have to adjust a little bit in terms of that. But when I look at Will Rogers on tape, one thing really sticks out to me. It's his patience. It's his ability to read through the progressions, not lock in on one wide receiver, rarely forcing things. You see that with his efficiency, with his completion percentage. As I mentioned, 74% in 2021, 68% in 2022. So that's a lot of 20,000s and 22s, but you get the general idea. Very efficient despite all the pass attempts that he kind of put up in the air. But he can do it all, right? He can throw, he can flick it with the wrist, he can go deep. And he's fine with taking what the defense is also giving him. And I think Washington is going to really play into that skill set as well. Now, we know about the talent. I'm not going to ramble on and on and on about the talent that is Will Rogers. If you've watched college football, if you've heard about college football the last few years, good chances that you've probably heard of Will Rogers and just the talent that he possesses. What is Washington going to have to do to get the best out of Will Rogers? To maybe have back-to-back Heisman finalists, back-to-back Husky quarterbacks in New York City. You gotta replace. Check that. You're not going to replace. You got to try to get in the same ballpark as to where this wide receiver room was. Now, Michael Penix was a great quarterback, but I believe it's the wide receiver room, the Rome Odunze and the Jalen McMillan had as big a part in the success of Washington the last 2 years as Michael Penix. Now, you're going to lose those guys. Odunze and McMillan are going to be NFL wide receivers next season. Hopefully Jalen Polk comes back. You got to try to replenish, maybe is the right word, this wide receiver room. Ever since the transfer portal opened, right away, you had a kid transfer into the portal from Notre Dame by the name of Tobias Merriweather. Fans of football and followers of football up in the Pacific Northwest in the state of Washington might know this guy. He's from the state of Washington. Right away when he entered the portal, he was crystal ball to Washington. I think we're just waiting for it to happen. But he's from Camas, Washington at Union High School. 4-star, top 80 kid coming out. Tall kid, can do a lot of things on a football field. If they can get him to come into Washington possibly next season, that could be the start of replenishing this wide receiver room on the banks of Lake Washington. And that's going to really help out Will Rogers. I know Polk is going to be really, really good. And I think if there's going to be a star, obviously, it's probably going to be him. But I think the ball is going to be distributed around maybe a little bit more. I know it was pretty good this year, right? They had lots of wide receivers. They threw it to a lot of different guys. But I think you're really going to especially see more distribution as well within this Washington offense. There's a lot to replace in Seattle, folks, but they started it by bringing in a quarterback in Will Rogers that we know can be one of the best quarterbacks in college football. And if you surround him with talent, this can be a Washington offense. Will they replicate what happened this year? I don't know if it will be a carbon copy, but they could get close. And that's, I think, a great thing as well. I want to talk about one last thing as it pertains really to Washington fans. And this is kind of one thing that's possibly happening in Oregon as well, but I'll maybe save that for a different video and a different commentary. I think Will Rogers has the opportunity, and I think this Washington coaching staff has the opportunity to see Will Rogers possibly develop the next generation at Washington. And the next generation has the opportunity to learn under an experienced guy in Will Rogers that did it in the SEC and now that will probably do it in the Big Ten. Austin Mack, the 8th-ranked quarterback in the class of 2023, 6'6", 226 pounds. You watch him on tape. He seems to be the future in Seattle. Top 75 overall player. He was neck and neck kind of in those ratings, 24/7 Sports with Aiden Chiles. So this is a great opportunity. You can't throw in transfers forever. I believe Austin Mack, this is his chance to learn, to develop, learn some things, some tricks of the trade that Will Rogers has learned over time in the SEC and apply them so when we get to 2025, it's plug and play and the Huskies already have their quarterback. I want to hear what you guys think of Will Rogers coming to Seattle to be the next quarterback for the Dogs. Could he be one of the best quarterbacks in the Big Ten in 2024? Leave your thoughts, all things Will Rogers going to Washington, in the comments below. I'm Big Ten Ted. We'll see you in the next one.
Thanks for watching Big Ten Ted, where it's all Big Ten all year long. Make sure to like the video to spread the word of Big Ten Ted to the masses, and subscribe to the channel for updates on Big Ten content that drops every day.